questions, questions orales.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Common sense Conservatives will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost of interest. According to Scotiabank, the Prime Minister's deficits are adding 2 full percentage points extra in interest costs for the average family. That works out to about $6,000 for a modest mortgage of $300 grand. $6 grand in extra mortgage payments from these deficits alone. Will they finally wake up to the fact that this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition seems to know the cost of everything but the value of absolutely nothing. Does he not see value in the measures that are building more homes in this country? Does he not see value in programs that are going to put food on the table for hungry kids through a school food program? He continues to oppose measures that are helping students with the cost of their education and the families with the cost of housing. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to put measures on the table to make life more affordable for middle-class Canadians and do right by a generation of young people who've been priced out of the housing market. It's a shame his policies would have the exact opposite effect.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we can't see the value of homes and food that don't exist after 8 years. They have a food program which after 8 years has no food, a affordable housing program which has doubled housing costs. They're not worth the cost, and now their deficits are driving up the interest obligations for the average family. For a family with a $500,000 mortgage, deficits are adding 10 grand in additional interest payments per year. When will they realize that after 8 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, he wants to talk about homes that don't exist. Perhaps we should look at the 800,000 affordable housing units that were lost while he was housing minister. Perhaps we should examine the fact that while he was minister, 0 new apartments were supported by the federal government and a total of only 6 affordable housing units nationwide. Now, he likes to talk a big game, but let's look at the plan he's putting on the table. He wants to raise taxes on home construction and cut funding for the cities that are making it easier to build home. We've advanced programs that are not just going to build more homes, but allow people to save up more money with their down payment and reduce their monthly mortgage costs when they go to join the housing market for the...
Excusez-moi. Excusez-moi.
Excuse me. I understand that there was a problem with interpretation.
To see, is the interpretation now working from English to French? Do we have English to French? Do we have it working now? Can anybody give me a signal? Okay. Alors, je vais inviter le...
So I will invite the minister to restart his answer because it wasn't understood by a number of members. The Honourable
Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member wants to talk about homes that don't exist. Let's talk about the 800,000 affordable housing units that were lost when he was last in government. Let's talk about the fact that when he was actually housing minister, he got 0 apartments built with the support of the federal government. Let's look at the fact that across the entire country, he was able to get a total of only 6 affordable housing units built. Mr. Speaker, he talks a big game, but he does literally nothing for the people who need to get into the housing market. We've got new measures that help people who are renting now and measures that will make it easier to save up for a down payment and to reduce your monthly mortgage costs if you want to own a home in this country.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
More proof this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost is that he picked the most incompetent immigration minister in Canadian history and put him in charge of housing. The guy who lost track of 1 million people, who's blamed by his fellow cabinet colleagues for causing the housing crisis, and who presides over the most expensive housing market in Canadian history. When I was minister, the average rent was $950, and we built hundreds of thousands of units at that affordable price. So why won't he learn from our smashing success in 2015 in keeping costs low by axing the tax and building the home?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, now at the time they expressed opposition to our plan to welcome 40,000 Afghan refugees who fought alongside the Canadian Armed Forces. They seem still to have problems with the fact that we opened our doors to vulnerable Ukrainians. But let's actually actually focus on the housing issue right now, Mr. Speaker. He talks a big game about housing, but he plans to raise tax.
They heckled his entire question. Frank, they heckled his whole question.
Order. The Honourable Order. I'm going to ask all members on all sides of the House to please, I'll ask the Honourable Member from Milton. Colleagues, I'm going to ask the honourable members, including the all honourable members, to please bring this back to order. The honourable minister has 15 seconds left on the clock.
Mr. Speaker, they get antsy when they're confronted with their actual record. Let's take a look at what he got done. Only 6 affordable housing units across the entire country. Lost 800,000 more. 0 new apartments. Now he wants to raise taxes on home building and cut funding for the communities who are getting them built.
Member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
While the finance minister is out buying new budget shoes today, she should drop by a Toronto food bank where 1 in 10 Torontonians are having to use their services after 8 years of her government. Tomorrow's expensive photo op budget will only confirm why interest rates are staying higher for longer and why Canadians can't afford to eat, heat, and house themselves. After 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, they are not worth the cost of housing. Will this Liberal NDP government listen to Conservatives, cap spending, bring in a dollar for dollar law to bring down inflation and interest rates so Canadians don't lose their homes?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe the honourable member opposite needs to take a look at what is announced earlier this month and the month before, which is that inflation in Canada is below 3% for the second month in a row. Mr. Speaker, AAA debt rating for this country, one of the very few countries in the world to have that. Mr. Speaker, lowest debt to GDP ratio. Now, while that party is all doom and gloom, we are here working every day for Canadians on a school food program, on a Canada Child benefit, on making sure that we have $10 childcare across the country. Mr. Speaker, we're working for Canadians each and every day.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
With answers like that, he'll make a great high-priced Liberal consultant after the next election who's not worth the cost. What doesn't he understand? When 2 million Canadians are going to a food bank in a single month, 1 million more projected to this year, where young people can't see the dream of home ownership, where rents and mortgages have doubled after failed policy of the Liberal NDP government. Why doesn't he get with the program and before he gets kicked out of his position and listen to Canadians? Why don't they implement a dollar for dollar law, cap the spending, so Canadians don't lose their homes?
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, that party and that member not only have no plan for housing, the meager plan that they have actually wants to make it more expensive to build houses in this country, and they're against every single measure that we've done to actually make home ownership affordable for Canadians again. Mr. Speaker, that Alberta MP voted against Air Products' $1.6 billion net hydrogen plant in our province, voted against the first carbon capture, use and storage net zero cement plant in our province. Mr. Speaker, they're voting against Alberta jobs. They're voting against Canadians. We're here for Albertans and Canadians each and every day.
The Honourable Member from Peterborough Kawartha.
After 8 years, this NDP Liberal government Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Emily Wheaton is a single mom who lost her home because she didn't qualify for her mortgage renewal. Why? Because of this Liberal NDP inflationary spending, which has driven up interest rates. So now she's forced to rent. She's paying nearly $4,000 for a 600 square foot apartment. Tomorrow's budget, we're asking for the Prime Minister to show compassion and sanity. Have $1 of spending for every new dollar spent, so Canadians can afford to keep their homes.
The The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, what you will see in tomorrow's budget is support for renters and homeowners alike, and we'll do that all the while being fiscally prudent with the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the G7 with a AAA credit rating from an independent, objective observer, Mr. Speaker, as well as traditionally low unemployment. We do that at the same time as working for the most vulnerable in this country, something that the Conservatives vote against every single time. We expect all members of this House to support Canadians across the board. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Peterborough Kawartha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What Canadians don't believe is anything they say. Right. They've had 8 years to prove a record, and more homes were built in the 1970s than have been built today. 10 cities across this country are normal. Don't tell people they've never had it so good when we have record high usage of food banks, when we have young people who will never own a home, and when interest rates have went up 2%, causing $10,000 a year in interest payments alone. Shame. Let's do a dollar for dollar. Let's show some sanity, and let's allow Canadians to keep their homes.
The Honourable Minister for Families and Children.
I think what Canadians need to know is what the Conservative response is to the affordability challenges that Canadians are facing. It's cuts. It's cuts to the programs that they need and are supporting them in a time of need, abandoning them when they most need it. On this side of the House, we've put forward a national school food program. We've put forward $10 a day childcare, the Canada Child Benefit, supports that are helping Canadians put food on the table and support their families, in contrast to everything that they oppose.
Honourable Member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Farmers have reached a breaking point. The carbon tax has driven costs sky high. They are drowning in a sea of red tape, and worst of all, they're constantly derided and demonized by this Liberal government. Will this Prime Minister finally give farmers a break and axe the tax to make food cheaper for everyone by passing Bill C-234 in its original form?
The Honourable Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And being a farmer, I'm fully aware that farmers are on the front line of climate change. They see the devastation impact of climate change in this country and the destruction of burns, killing cattle. But also we have a price on pollution, Mr. Speaker, and along with the price on pollution, we have a Canada carbon rebate, which puts more money back in the pockets of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, why does the Conservative Party of Canada want to take that money away from Canadians?
The Honourable Member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, it was clear from the PBO that 6 out of 10 Canadian families are worse off. They're worse off because of that carbon tax and so-called rebate. It's clear that these Liberals will not lift a finger to provide farmers and Canadians with relief from their cruel carbon tax. And if the Prime Minister won't commit to passing C-234 or a carbon tax election, what does he have to say to the families of Autonomy South Monaghan who've doubled their use of the food banks in the last 6 months?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I would respond to the Honourable Member that he just should advance a couple rows up here. I could introduce him if he'd like. Speak to the Opposition House Leader. Bill C-234 is completely in their hands. Right. If they would like to bring it to the floor for a vote, we could deal with it. But while I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, and we're talking about doubling, C-59 is something he could also do something about, which would bring the carbon rebate to double what it is today. Let's pass that today, have a positive impact for the constituents that he serves, and bring a better carbon rebate to rural Canada.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member from Battle River, Crowfoot.
On April 1st, that Prime Minister hiked the already crippling carbon tax by 23%. Jake from Vermeer's Dairy near Camrose calculated that by 2030, he will be paying nearly $1,500 a month in additional carbon tax for the daily milk pickup alone. That is higher costs that consumers are forced to pay because of those Liberal policies. After 8 years, that NDP Liberal Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost. So my question for those Liberals is this. Will they pass Bill C-234 in its unamended original form so that Canadians can afford to eat?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
It is important that people are not talking nonsense in the chamber. The parliamentary budget officer actually said that he was extremely troubled by the opposition's selective use of the facts and their spin. Now 300 Canadian economists from across the country have said the price on pollution is the best way to reduce carbon emissions in a manner that actually addresses affordability. It is a true shame in this House that we have a climate-denying opposition, one that doesn't care about affordability. It is truly a shame.
Member from Kingston and the Islands.
Mr. Speaker, Danielle from Alberta knows that she gets back more in the Canada carbon rebate than she pays through the federal-backed South on pricing pollution. Premier Smith, Danielle, actually did the math herself and came to the conclusion that, quote, I would say that I probably ended up better off with that transfer, end quote. Can the Minister of Environment and Climate Change please inform Danielle and other Canadians of what they should expect to see in their bank accounts today as a result of the Canada carbon rebate, and how much this policy is helping Canadians with the cost of living while at the same time protecting the environment for generations to come?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank Danielle for her testimony. With the next quarterly carbon rebate payments starting to arrive in Canadian bank accounts and mailboxes as of today, in Danielle's province of Alberta, a family of 4 will receive up to $450 4 times this year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over 300 economists, it was 200 last week, it's now 300, from coast to coast agree that the evidence showed that not only does carbon pricing reduce pollution in Canada, but it does so at a lower cost than any other approaches. Pricing pollution works, it can support Canadians and fight for climate change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.